Now, I'm sure over the past few months, everybody has seen the rise of infantry and the absolute domination of cavalry commanders. And while these two different troop types have been getting major time in the spotlight, tons of kills are really, really powerful. The one troop type that's doing really not so good at the moment is the archer commanders. They have so many issues going on between their kits, how they're working in the current meta, their future potential. There's 101 things that are just extremely bad with archers right now. Like, honestly, they're in a worse position than infantry were in when I made that video about infantry needing some help. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the current archer meta position. I'm going to talk about the issues we have with archers, both smite damage related and also other issues they have, and how we can fix those issues. So if you want to know how to fix archer commanders or just why I think archers are in a pretty bad position right now, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now, like I said in the intro of today's video, I'm saying archers have a lot of issues, and we'll start off by discussing those issues, and more importantly, we'll really focus down on the issues archer commanders have when we relate it to smite damage, because if you don't know, smite damage is the new thing. It's the newest thing that was released into the game. It came with Lao Che and Gorgo, the two newest infantry commanders, and just as a quick refresher, the way it works, whenever you activate pretty much smite damage, you're using normal attack bonuses instead of skill damage. So that's the way smite damage works. It's really just another form of damage factor, and the only thing it doesn't use skill damage bonuses. So it just uses normal attack. That means normal attack reductions, normal attack increase will all affect smite damage. So that's the only difference pretty much between smite and normal skill damage. But the thing is, the issue with archers is they're severely affected by it. And the first one is smite just counters the two biggest archer primaries, because when we look at Boudica Prime and Henry, a large part of their kit is a skill damage taken reduction. Henry on his active skill is a 30% skill damage taken reduction, which lasts for 5 seconds, and Boudica Prime on her third skill has a 25% skill damage taken reduction, which is just a permanent thing. So between Boudica and Henry, the two largest archer primaries, really, the ones you'll see on the open field the most, they both have a large chunk of their kit related to skill damage taken reduction. And what does Smite do? Well, Smite bypasses that, and because archers are already a very squishy troop type, we're going to notice that if we see a large domination of Smite in the meta, the current archer commanders will just get demolished by them, especially Henry, who is really tanky, because that skill damage reduction is just very, very good, and without that, he is much, much weaker. So against current infantry, which they're supposed to be countering, the smite is just countering them. So Henry and Boudica, yes, they can almost beat a Lao Che, but if you put a Lao Che with a Gorgo, they just never ever win. So that's the real first issue with archers right now. They cannot beat the smite meta, and since they're supposed to counter infantry, they can't, which is just a bad thing. If they're not countering the troop you want them to counter, they're not going to be in a good position, which is just something I've noticed as we've seen smite come into the game. Now, the next issue with archers that's also related to smite damage is archer commanders are extremely heavy in on skill damage. For example, Boudica Prime, one of the most powerful things in her kit is her active skill debuff, increasing the amount of skill damage you deal to an opponent by 35%. And guess what? Smite is not affected by that. So if Smite becomes the meta, Boudica Prime's debuff is a lot less valuable. When we look at Cyrus the Great, he makes your opponents deal 40% less skill damage. Guess what? If Smite becomes meta, it's much less valuable. Zulang's third skill has a skill damage increase. He also has the skill damage tree, not to mention Boudica Prime and Cyrus also have the skill damage tree, so if we see a Smite meta, a commander like Zulang becomes much less valuable, and the same thing obviously with YSG, who has a 50% skill damage bonus, which doesn't affect Smite. So out of the 6 commanders which I currently run in my murder ball, and this is probably the best, if not one of the best archer murder balls you can get, 4 of them have something related to skill damage, and the other 2 are skill damage oriented. Nebuchadnezzar, skill damage tree. Henry actually has a skill damage increase on his rally skill. So we've just seen that out of the 6 commanders I've mentioned, all 6 of them have something skill damage oriented. And if Lilith decides to push a smite meta, all of these commanders will lose investment potential, which is just a very bad thing, and it's really the next issue. Since all these archers are very, very high in on skill damage, they all have fairly low investment potential. Zulang is the only one I can say with some confidence will still have a lot of value because he's almost brand new, but Boudica Prime, Henry, even YSG, Nebu, Cyrus, and then every single other archer commander has a much lower investment potential just because we don't know where the current smite meta is going to go, and if Lilith decides to release smite archer commanders, all of these other archer commanders just will not work very well with them. Zulang won't work too well. Boudica will be average at best, especially since her active skill needs a good secondary behind her. Nebuchadnezzar, really skill damage oriented. YSG, absolutely all in on skill damage. So if we see a smite archer meta, archers are just not prepared to take in those smite commanders. And unlike infantry, who have a ton of normal attack commanders mixed in with their kit and have high normal attack generally, archers don't have that. Like, for example, the infantry, they have Scipio, who doesn't really have too many skill damage personal increases. He doesn't even have any at all from what I can see here. So he perfectly works fine with a smite commander. Maybe his active skill is normal direct damage factor, but regardless, he's still going to work with Lao Che. Also, every single other infantry commander, for the most part, doesn't really orient themselves on skill damage, besides like Guan Yu and besides Sargon. So when we look at infantry, they were able to take in those smite commanders. But with archers, they're all in on skill damage. So that means the only way we could really see archers stay in the meta is if they release someone with skill damage but with a normal attack reduction. And the reason that becomes an issue is because if you have only archers with skill damage, because we may see Cavs with smite damage, Boudica Prime becomes more of a niche commander, and all of these skill damage debuffs become way more archer focused, which means they don't have as much value. So a commander like Boudica Prime, who's supposed to have a lot of value for that skill damage taken increase debuff, which would usually affect 7 out of 7 commanders, might only affect 2 or 3 out of the 7, depending on how many skill damage marches you are running. So for a future investment right now, archers are just in a really bad position, especially since every single possible commander release at the moment doesn't really seem like it would suit some of these older and still powerful primary commanders. So now that we've gone over the current issues with archers inside of the smite meta and dealing with smite damage, we also have some other issues that do concern archer commanders. And the first issue is archers are currently in a fairly cavalry dominated meta. When we look at the current amount of cavs on the open field, it's a really large amount, and for that reason, not many people really want to run that many archer marchers. Like, if you're going up against a murder ball with 3 cavs and you've got 3 archers, you're pretty much guaranteed to lose. And because we're in a cav meta, a lot of players are running 3 cav marchers. It's really not that unheard of. I see it quite often. And if not 3 cav marchers, I see 2 really strong cav marchers with a special unit and with the civilization buffs and with all the equipment. So all of this really cavalry dominated meta is affecting the archers, because even though infantry have started to tame down the cavs a little bit and stop them from running so rampant, a Nevsky and a Joan is still going to destroy archers, and that's obviously an equal thing, and a Hauche being with a William is still going to destroy archers, but at the moment archers can't even be infantry, so we can see that with the current cav meta, archers are just in a fairly bad open field position, not to mention they can't even deal with the current smite meta, so archers right now in the open field just aren't in a good position, and the cavs do play quite a big role in that. Now, the next issue with archer commanders is the fact that they're pretty much just a full commander cycle behind, and this is related to when they release archer commanders, because when we look at the archer meta, archers always seem to release as literally the last commander release. Either it's before leadership or after leadership, and currently, infantry and cavs are a full cycle ahead, because infantry have Lao Che and Gorgo, cavs have Hauche Bing and Justinian, so when we look at the current commanders for both infantry and cavalry, their murder balls are just a whole generation ahead of archer commanders. And the reason this comes into an issue is because when we look at someone like Zulang, who was technically released at the same time as Joan Prime and Sargon, he is very powerful, but he can't really keep up with the other commanders. And when we look at the current archer murder ball, the absolute best one in the game is probably a Boudica Prime with an Artemisia, a Nebu with a YSG, and a Henry with a Zulang. And out of those 6 commanders, 3 of them are over like a year and a half to 2 years old. So a lot of the archer commanders, because they're so far behind on release, are just very, very old. They're just older commanders who don't really have too much going for them. Not to say they're bad in any way, but they're just not as strong as you would need them to be. So when we look at the current archer commanders, they're fully outdated by 1 generation, which means they're missing at a minimum an extra open field commander, with the possibility of there being 2 open field commanders that could come out. And for that reason, archers are just behind a full cycle. And I usually don't advocate for more commanders, but I think with archers, they're always in this awkward position where infantry and cavs have the 2 new meta commanders, and they're just in a bad position overall because they always get their commander slightly later, and now that leadership come right in between the infantry and then the archer cycle, archers take even longer to get commanders, which means we're going to see longer waits for archers to get commanders, which also means we may be seeing them pushed out of the meta gradually, as the commanders just take so long to release, and then cavs come right after to counter them. So infantry get that glory time where they get a whole extra commander cycle, and then archers are just sitting there like, okay, we can beat the infantry, but new cavs are out. So archers, in terms of commander releases and their current commanders, are also in a bad position because they need something to counter smite, but they probably won't get it for maybe another 3 to 6 months, which is just not good for the current archer meta. So now that we've discussed all the issues relating to the current archer meta, how would I say we can really fix it and keep it fair for the whole entire game meta? And the first thing I would like to say that archers really need is a commander who can counter smite, and I don't know how this would look. Whether it's a commander who reduces normal attack that infantry are dealing, or just even in general commanders are dealing, or a commander who is taking reduced normal attack themselves instead of reduced skill damage. So as you can see here, Boudica, skill damage taken reduction. Maybe a commander who's doing a normal attack damage taken reduction instead of that could be very, very powerful. Also, we could maybe even see someone with smite damage who can somehow fit in the meta. Maybe they still are affected by skill damage decreases. Maybe there's something that works with them. I'm not too sure how that could go. But archers just need something that can work against the current infantry smite meta, because if they can't beat that, they're in a bad position overall. Because if you want to have archers, you want them to beat infantry, and if they're not beating infantry, you don't want archers. So we need something to beat the smite meta and even possibly integrate itself into the smite meta while working with other commanders. And to do that, I don't know what they would do. Whether they release a whole new smite commander for archers, whether they release one with normal attack, whether they release one who's giving a normal attack damage increase to give them some value, could be something that Lilith could do, but they just need something that works well with the smite meta. The other thing archers could be receiving, which I think would go a long way, is a Ramses and an Artemisia relic. And I know usually it would be a cavalry, then infantry, then archers relic, but really when we look at the current archer meta, one of the very powerful commanders who is just needing a little bit of an edge to go back into a very usable position is Artemisia. She's good currently, like she's a good commander, but if we wanted to be a great commander, I think a small relic would go quite the long way. So if we gave archers a small relic on even Ramses, who is a commander who was usually a very good primary, but currently is not the very good primary he used to be, if we gave someone like Ramses a relic, it could open an avenue for more archer marchers and give them more value on the open field. So revitalizing a few older commanders for archers is certainly possible, and since we now know that all the KVK2 commanders have been given their relics, we could be seeing something similar to releasing Archer Commander relics anytime soon. Even if they do decide to release Cav relics before Archers and Infantry before Archers, we should be seeing something like a Ramses and Artemisia relic possibly within the next maybe year at the most. So a Ramses Artemisia relic would go a long way and definitely would help give those older commanders who are still fairly decent besides Ramses a bit of new life in some way and allow them to beat some of the more meta commanders, because commanders like Ramses, who have been out of the meta for quite a while, definitely could work within the meta, because Ramses has a lot of attack in his basically skill trees, which obviously works with the current smite meta. Only issue though, he has a massive skill damage taken reduction, so I don't know how they would integrate him into a smite meta, but it definitely has some possibilities, because he is rocking the attack tree. And even Artemisia works really well with Boudica at the moment, isn't too skill damage oriented, she's got all damage increases, she's got really high stats, but she doesn't really have much skill damage. So out of all the commanders we've really seen for archers, Ramses and Artemisia do need a relic, and I think it could work in the current smite meta and allow them to get more value. Now, the final thing I would say archers need to become more in the meta is probably 2 new primary commanders who are very powerful, because Boudica and Henry, yes, they are strong, but when we look at infantry and when we look at cavalry, they're a full 2 primary commanders ahead. Cavalry have Hao Bing and they have Justinian, which are just 2 primary commanders who are really, really strong. Infantry have got Lao Che and Tarek, and even Sargon in some ways, who are decent primaries. Lao Che works as a primary, Sargon works as a primary, Tarek works as a primary, even Scipio and Guan work as a primary. So out of all the other troop types, we can notice that archers are much more lacking on their primary commanders. Like Zulang, yes, he works as a primary, but you'd rather him as a secondary. Henry is a good primary. Boudica is a good primary. Cyrus, mainly a secondary. YSG, mainly a secondary. Nebu should be a secondary, but he has to be a primary. So when we look at all of these commanders that archers currently have, they're lacking good, strong primaries who will work in the current meta. So if we add some primary commanders for archers, I think it would go a long way. Since they've got enough secondaries, a lot of the commanders can be substituted to become secondaries, like Cyrus, even Zulang and Nebu can all work as secondaries. We don't really need more secondaries for archers. So if we see some more strong primaries who can counter that smite meta, possibly even go well with a relic Ramses or a relic Artemisia, we could see archers enter back into the meta again and hold some more potential as a decent investment for 2 or so marches, because currently you only run 1 archer march. It's like a Boudica with Azul Lang, and other than that, Henry is countered too well by Cavs and too well by infantry, and then Nebu YSG, like I said in my other video, get looked at funny, it gets destroyed. So really, your only archer march at the moment is a Boudica Azul Lang, and to be fair, in the meta, you should have around 2 marches of each troop type be very viable. But Henry, yes, he is very good, and I still like him. He's just nowhere near as viable as running 2 Cavs and running 2 infantry, and for that reason, you want them to be a little bit more on par. So adding another primary who in a way could replace Henry, or at least be a different version or a different option, would definitely go quite the way. So now that we've gone over all the issues and how to fix the issues with Archer Commanders and how they work with the Smite meta, what do I really think of them overall? And to be honest, I think that Archers are in a very bad position, like even worse than Infantry were a few months ago when I made the video about them, because Archers right now don't beat Infantry, they don't beat Cavs. There's a really big Infantry and Cav meta, and Archers themselves, you can only really run 1 march. So for that reason, the Archers are probably in the worst position in the game out of any troop type, maybe even has ever been, because at least when Infantry were not very good, you didn't really have too many Archer marches. You maybe have 2 to 3, but since Archers are being countered by Infantry and countered by Cavs, they're just in a very, very bad position overall, because they can't beat what they're meant to beat, and they're losing to what they're meant to beat, if anything. Plus, there's a massive Cav meta right now, so Archers probably in the worst position they've ever been, and they definitely need some serious new commanders and possibly even relics for their older commanders to become stronger in the current meta. But I don't think that they are absolutely useless. I think Archers still have future potential, and also running 1 archer march, a Boudica with Azul Lang, is also definitely still viable. So I don't think just throw them out the window. They've still got some value against Guan Yu, and they've still got some value against a few other infantry marches. They are just really struggling against the full-on meta right now. And that's really the reason I'm making this video, because Archers need a new commander who's going to work in the meta and beat, if anything, destroy the current infantry meta to become viable again. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, allow me to ask just one small favor, and that is, let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of the current Archer meta? What do you think they should add? Because like I said with the infantry video, I think Lilith does sometimes look at some of these videos and take some inspiration of what to do. And even if they don't, at least we get to have our fun guessing what Lilith should do to make commanders good again and a troop type good again. So let me know in the comments down below, which commanders do you think Archers should get if you have any ideas. Tell me if you think they should get specific buffs. Do you think there's a specific, basically, stat Archers really need? Let me know in the comments down below. I find it all very interesting, and I will like, respond to, and also heart every single comment. So feel free to comment. It helps the video, it helps me, and I find them very, very interesting. Now, I just want to say thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next one.